Okay, I think we can start. So the poll will stay active for probably another 30 seconds or so. But good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining our discussion today on a really important and pertinent topic of digital inclusion. So digitization, that word is not on the table for debate today, because it's not really a question of whether digitization is happening or it's not happening. I mean, we are so far along the road to digitization, and it's happening faster than we expected. And maybe some of that is due to the pandemic. But I mean, our children are growing up in this digital world, and nobody's written a textbook for us on how to properly and fairly navigate that world. And this move and shift towards digital is definitely going to continue. It's going to get better. It's going to get faster. But I think what we've all learned, and most certainly the panelists and our guests today, is that in this shift to digital, we are leaving a significant proportion of people behind. And that's what we've come to talk about today. So we've got 4 key aims of the session. Firstly, we're going to dispel some myths around digital exclusion. So we'll look at some of the facts around the drivers and the impacts for exclusion and the impact that has on us and society and obviously our organizations. Then we'll look at the barriers some of our customers are faced. So when they're presented with self-service digital journeys, we'll look at what they're up against, and we'll try to raise awareness of the impact that this is having on some of your customers. Then we will profile some of the solutions that are available out there in the market. We'll also look at how you can build some solutions internally within your organization to help people gain access, capability, and confidence online. And then lastly, we really want to just raise awareness, encourage investment, and importantly, collaboration to drive further progress around digital inclusion. So my name is Kerry Nicolades. I work for the SOP Wisteria, and I head up our specialist function for vulnerability, inclusion, and wellbeing. I'm chairing the session today and really pleased to welcome and be joined by our 3 guests. So we've got Daniel Marshall from Citizens Advice, we've got Tom Lowe from Digital Poverty Alliance, and our very own Joanna Finley from SOP Wisteria. It's just a little bit of housekeeping. So we're recording the session today. We will answer as many questions as possible. So we have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. But if you hear something you need an answer on, just pop it in the Slido, which is actually embedded in WebEx. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see it says active session and a blue bar, and within that you'll see Q&A and poll. So as something comes to mind, pop it in there and I will try and weave it into the conversations. If I don't find an appropriate time, I'll definitely ask it at the end. Well, if we have time. If we don't, we can always follow up with you afterwards. We had our first poll, so I think that one's closed now, and it looks like 94% of you think that, I mean, the majority, oh, that's weird. 77% is the winner there. I think that's stopped moving now. So once we've dispelled some myths, I'll ask Joanna to give us more light on that figure, and we'll open up for another poll. So turning to our experts, I'm going to ask them to each introduce themselves, just a quick fire introduction, but then also we've asked them to prepare a myth that they'd like to see dispelled around digital inclusion. So Daniel, if I can go to you first, and then Joanna, and then Thomas, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning. So yeah, I'm Daniel. I'm Director of Business Development at Citizens Advice nationally. We provide free, independent, impartial advice to members of the public on a whole host of a kind of range of topics, and we're seeing huge levels of demand for our service, as I think is probably pretty well documented. In terms of a myth, so one of the things that we talk about a lot is we're often asked whether our clients are sort of face-to-face clients or other channel type clients, and we know and we know that it's far more fluid than that. It's nowhere near as simple as sort of you prefer face-to-face for this thing or you need remote channels. It's far more fluid, it's far more tailored, and it's important that organizations recognize that. You get people who interact across all of those channels. You get people who might not have the confidence or capability, but could quite easily get to use other channels more effectively with the right support. And I know we're going to touch on that today. So that's one of the things that we tackle a lot within our service, and there's a little bit of a myth that we'd like to see go.
Thanks, Daniel. So I'm Joanna Finley. I spent most of my career today in financial services and very passionate about making sure that it is accessible and creates equitable outcomes for all people. And one area where I see that not happening particularly well is the accelerated digitisation of this, financial services. So I think that there is stuff that service providers can do to proactively help everyone gain the benefits of digitised services. And the myth that I would love to dispel is that it's one-way traffic. So the poll was in a way slightly misleading, actually, because they were all pretty high figures, and it's kind of it depends on your definition, doesn't it? So if 77% was the figure, then that might be in terms of some capability. 94% is how many people say that they're online, but that's not one-way traffic. And it is pertinent at the minute to mention that the cost of living crisis is pushing some people offline. You can no longer assume that if someone's got a mobile phone, that they have got internet access. So that would be the myth I'd like to dispel.
Thanks, Joanna. So hi, everybody. My name is Tom Lowe, and I'm Head of Policy and Comms at the Digital Poverty Alliance. So we're a charity that aims to bring together public, private and third sectors to work to overcome digital poverty. And we have a headline ambition to end digital poverty in the UK by 2030. In terms of a myth that I think should be dispelled, I think there is quite a persistent myth still that the idea of digital poverty will solve itself over time, that as you have changes in generations where you have this idea of digital natives who have the skills to be able to navigate technologies in a way that is perhaps better than previous generations, over time this will mean that the problem will sort of naturally self-correct. But I think that it suffers from a couple of issues. I think first is to assume that digital poverty and digital inclusion is something that only impacts the older generation. We know that the impacts of digital poverty can affect a broad cross-section of people. It's not sort of contingent on age alone. And I think it also underestimates the extent to which, even if young people may be regarded as digitally native, their skills and their capabilities may actually be quite narrow. They may be restricted, say, to mobile use, but perhaps not the sort of skills and capabilities, say, to apply for a job or to do research or to use the internet to unlock a broader range of sort of social purposes. So I think that's the big thing that really needs to be dispelled, the idea that it will take care of itself over time. Unfortunately, it's going to need a lot more effort, and it's going to need a lot more collaboration of different sectors coming together to really solve it once and for all.
That's great. And thanks, the three of you, again, for your time today. Tom, I'm going to come to you for the first question. So you used the language of digital poverty quite a lot. Could you help us better understand how many people this affects and in what ways?
So it's a simple question, and then there are complexities within the question. So there isn't at the moment a sort of reliable measure of what digital poverty looks like. But there are different sort of indicators that can provide a snapshot that lead us to the conclusion that digital poverty affects millions of people across the UK. So what one indicator says is to look at how many people have the skills and capability to actually use the internet for particular purposes. So there's the report that's put out by Lloyds Bank, the Consumer Digital Index every year, and that estimates around 20% of the UK population do not have the foundational level of essential digital skills. So that equates to around 10 million people. So it's a huge number of people that may be able to do some of those skills, but that lack the broader range of skills that are associated with the essential digital skills framework. The other way then of looking at it is to look at how many people have access to a home broadband connection. Not just that they have access, but also that the quality of that connection is reliable and that the speeds are sufficient. So research from Ofcom indicates around 6% of households do not have a reliable internet connection, and that equates to, I think, about 1.7 million households. And then on top of that, you have about 2% of the population that do have internet access or do have a home broadband connection, but don't actually use it. The other useful indicator is then thinking about people who may have connectivity and may have a device, but only access through a mobile phone. So that affects about 18% of the adult population only access through a smartphone. So I think that it sort of underscores that when we talk about digital poverty, it very much exists on the sort of continuum. It's not something that is reflects a sort of a static state, but it's something that anybody in a way can sort of fall in or out of, depending on their life circumstances and depending on their context. There is a very interesting piece of work that's being undertaken currently by the University of Liverpool in collaboration with other partners to establish a minimum digital living standard, which aims basically to develop an idea of what we mean when we talk about inclusion and exclusion. And I think that's going to be a really, really important piece of work in terms of trying to measure what digital inclusion and exclusion is, but also how it changes over time. And I think that that's going to be really, really useful to understand that as people are facing the cost of living crisis, as people are facing these sort of changes with technology, how the sort of rate of inclusion and exclusion is changing over time.
Thank you, Tom. Really, really interesting. So this is probably a good question then to follow on for you, Joanna. So what Tom has outlined, is that the same definition of digital inclusion which you would consider in service design, or is it broader?
Yeah, I often find myself saying, well, what's the noun and what's the verb? So I think digital inclusion can describe a scale, as Tom says, and someone can sit on that scale, and that describes their current status. But digital inclusion can also be a very active word. It can be a verb of someone moving along that scale. And in terms of human-centered design, that's what I'm really interested in, because you've got these practical building blocks. Does someone have a device? Does that device work with the apps that are around now? Does someone have a connection? How stable is that? You know, I saw on Tom's website that 2.5 million people are currently behind with their broadband bills. Well, that does not bode well for people having a sustainable connection. Do they live in an area where mobile signal is like really patchy? Are they going to be left behind when most of the world's on 5G and they're still stuck on 3G? So you've got all these practical building blocks, and then you build onto them capabilities. So does someone know how to do something? Do they need instructions on how to do that? Does someone have a vulnerability that affects their use of the internet? So if you have a cognitive impairment that means that you struggle to follow a process because it requires you to remember things from earlier in the process, that could affect how you use the internet. But where, and this I say with a psychology degree, I get really interested in is people's motivations and their perceptions. And so I think when you are looking at service design, you take everything that Tom has looked at, and then you say, and what do I know, or what could I know about the perceptions of my customer of the services I'm trying to provide online, their perceptions of me and how that overlays onto that. So do they trust our firm? Do they believe that our services are safe? Do they believe that we're encouraging people online because it's good for customers, or just because it's going to save us money? So what perceptions or myths might they have around that? And then what is their motivation to move along that digital scale? And I think sometimes firms make the mistake of thinking that customers are going to adopt things just because we tell them that it's a good idea. And their motivations will be affected by all sorts of things. Their motivations could be positively influenced by their friends and family. I'm going to just throw out my favourite stat now. It's probably a bit too early in the session, but 66% of people, when learning new digital skills, would like to receive help from their friends and family. So So how are we honouring that role and empowering that role of friends and family to help people with their digital skills? Are we just sending them an email saying, did you know that you could do this online? Are we agitating them with IVRs that are saying, instead of waiting 15 minutes to talk to a human, do you know that you could do this online? And how is that making people feel? I think in service design, you always have to say, what does someone think, feel and do about the information that you're giving them? And so that's why I would say, to me, digital inclusion in service design has to be a very active word. It is definitely a verb. It is, how can we go on that journey with someone to be digitally included, and then look at the practical and perceptual barriers for getting there. Should I comment a little bit more about this here poll? It's very interesting. 94% of people would say that they're online. 69% of the people who aren't say that literally nothing would convince them to go online within the next year. So that's where perceptions or motivations come in. It's not just inevitable that everyone ends up online. 7% of the people who are currently online are already in device poverty, meaning that at some point it's going to be redundant to them. They're just simply not going to be able to access. I mean, we've all been in a situation, like my mobile got to the point where its battery life was so short, I was virtually not online. And then 7% of the people who are online are at risk of losing their connection, as we've said. Like, it's not one-way traffic. There's many things involved. And I do think that service providers need to concern themselves with all these, particularly in financial services, which is so essential to people thriving.
Thank you. Well, having worked with you, I now apply the think, feel, do to even how I run my relationships with my son. So it's been really useful. Thank you for that. And Wendy, would you mind just striking up the second poll? So I'll come to Daniel with the next question. But as we're going through that, maybe everybody could just engage with the poll that's come up as well. So it's also another myth busting one. So Daniel, we've heard a lot of really interesting stuff from Tom and Joanna. Was there anything that you wanted to add to that? I think, but with the more of a focus on lived experiences of people who face digital exclusion from your perspective, at the coalface.
I think the point that Joanna's making there is really important and speaks a little bit to the kind of myth that I said at the beginning, that to put people in brackets of whether it's preferring X channel or excluded versus included is clearly not right. And I think Joanna outlined that particularly clearly. And I think the other point that Joanna made at the beginning, which I think I would certainly stress from the information that we're seeing, is in the first 4 months of this year, we have seen more people during that period with more complex problems than we've ever seen before. We've broken about 70 records across those 70 different advice areas for demand being higher than we've ever seen in that 4-month window. So the cost of living, after something like the cost of living crisis in the news for quite a while, anything that's in the news for a while, I think people could kind of get used to and kind of get maybe a little bit tired of. This is an issue which is not going away anytime soon. And actually our data shows continues to have a severe and more detrimental impact on people's lives. So when we talk then about this, and as Joanna said, 2.5 million people behind on their broadband bills, less able to afford internet connections, data, and actually the hardware just to get online, that is an issue which I would say is likely to get worse, and therefore, as others have said here, it's simply not a case that more and more people just naturally grow and get online. Actually, given where we are in terms of the data, you would probably argue it's going to tip back slightly more.
So I'm going to probe you a bit more on that one. So if we don't fix digital inclusion, what are the consequences of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in an unequal society, and that has been exacerbated by the pandemic and then further by the cost of living crisis. And as I said, really, we're seeing increasing demand and complexity more than we've ever seen before. And I think when you add in some other factors to that, people are probably more time poor than they've been before. There is data that shows that, I think, will also suggest that the increase in working at home has actually led people to work more hours. So people are more time poor. But I think you can go a lot deeper, and I think when there is so much information online and so many services are accessed online, not being able to access that information puts you at a huge knowledge deficit and then probably an economic disadvantage in terms of access to jobs and ability to carry out jobs. But of course, technology is not without risk. So from a consequential perspective, getting that wrong is dangerous too. We know about the increasing risk of scams. We know that people are more susceptible to scams when things like the cost of living crisis, or the cost of living crisis that we're in. And then you can go even deeper around things like disinformation and all of those sorts of things which can exacerbate the inequalities in society. So I think this runs deep in terms of what our society really looks like and enabling people to improve their lives and participate in society in a meaningful way. But I would say, coming back to just a purely commercial perspective, if you push too hard or too fast and don't manage this in the right way, it's obvious that customers will lower their trust levels and it's obvious that you're likely to drive them away. So you've got these kind of really deep societal kind of important reasons why this matters. And then you've also got just purely commercial perspective that it feels quite an obvious thing to say, but it just really matters in terms of getting that right. It's not easy to get that right, but get that wrong, the consequences are really severe.
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel. So I'm going to probably ask one more question about understanding the size of the problem. So Tom, you've done a lot of research in this area. Do you have anything to add, I guess, on the impacts of digital poverty at a national level?
Yeah, I build on what Daniel's just said and agree with it, that I think that there's obviously a big impact that digital exclusion has on the most vulnerable in society. And so you can see that with respect to how people need digital to access essential services, say. So things like universal credit, things like looking for social housing, there's a massive online component to that. So that's really, really important. I mean, the other big impact that we obviously saw during the COVID-19 pandemic was education, that there was a real disparity between the ability of students to continue their studies when they were digitally enabled versus those that maybe didn't have a digital device, or if they did have a device, they might not have had an appropriate workspace, say, at home. And so there are ways in which the lack of provision of devices and connectivity can have, I think, a meaningful impact on people's educational outcomes. So I think that it is, very broad in terms of trying to work to get people online, but in a way that I guess is trying to accentuate the positive social benefits that people can get from online access. But also, I think, as Daniel says, being mindful of how we're working to create a sort of better internet culture alongside that, because I think that the online harms piece is very, very pertinent for people that may not have had much digital experience, who may, for example, be more vulnerable to scams or other sort of forms of disinformation or misinformation. So I think it is a sort of, it's a dual approach of both working to sort of focus on the motivation piece of sort of helping people to understand more about the digital world, often through sort of trusted intermediaries who are within communities that people know. But then also alongside that, thinking about how do you create a digital culture and a digital ecosystem that supports people to access social economic benefits, while at the same time minimizing those sort of harmful externalities that the digital world does have.
Thanks, Tom. So I think recognizing our attendees probably come from financial services, I'll turn that to you, Joanna, and we'll zoom in on the sector and your experience in financial services. So why is digital inclusion so important to businesses, and what happens if we get it wrong? Why should we be focusing on it?
I think any type of inclusion is important these days, and not because it makes good headlines. That's a bit of a bugbear of mine. But because it genuinely is better for your customers, and not just to make you feel good, but if half the population has a vulnerability of some sort, and as we've heard, there are millions of customers who lack essential digital skills. Something like 20% customers lack essential digital skills. this is going to start hitting your bottom line. So even if you're sat there thinking, I'm just interested in the bottom line. Well, there's good research out there that shows that inclusion drives revenues. It's also going to drive operational efficiency, right? If you get this right, and you can incrementally grow your customers' confidence with using these digital self-service channels, they're more likely to, to start to defer to that as their channel of preference. I have no problem with that. I'm all for customer convenience, but only if it is done in a really supported and safe way with trust at the heart of it. It worries me when I see people feeling pushed or forced to digitize, because I think even if they do adopt a digital service, say to log on once, and by the way, I'm just going to put it out there, I'm looking at this poll here, and seeing like 66, 72. Can we see the answer for that one, Wendy? So it's really interesting. There's a huge difference between people who are online at all and who would feel confident doing transactional online banking. I think it's 54%. People would use transactional mobile banking. Now, it's a higher number would actually use web banking. But from my experience in financial services, there's a huge difference between someone registering once and maybe being happy to obtain information on that channel. So they might be happy to check a balance, but if they want to do a withdrawal, or if they want to apply for a mortgage or something, they want the reassurance of human support. And I think that comes down to, I think Tom was just saying there about misinformation, about, people are concerned about cybersecurity, they're concerned about their data. All these things are going to start affecting your operations. If you have all these assumptions around operational efficiencies of people moving to the online channel, you can't take early adoption. You can't assume that because someone has registered or done one thing, they're automatically going to do the rest. And actually, if that person spends ages trying to do something online and then has to phone through, listen to an IVR telling them they could be doing this online, by the time they speak to one of your contact center operators, they're going to be so hacked off. It's more likely to be a complaint that person's got to deal with than just answering a simple question. So I think it has the opportunity to drive operational efficiency if it's done right and it's supported. It also has the potential to drive huge inefficiency and, go completely against the 3 E's of CX. If you're making it uneasy, you make it inefficient for people, then it's going to increase your complaints. And I realise this is not a webinar on customer duty, consumer duty, but all I'm going to say is if I was looking for evidence of whether a firm was creating fair and good outcomes for customers, I think I'd be asking to see what evidence you have for the channel that you're promoting most to customers, and whether you're creating good outcomes in that channel, whether people are receiving as good an outcome, depending on which action they want to do, but also how do your customers feel about that channel? That's the sort of evidence I would be looking for.
Can I just comment on that point, Kerry?
Of course.
I think so, because we've done a little bit of work on this, and we get more than 30 million hits to our website each year. It's obviously an organisation that has, depending on which piece of research you read, some place the recognition and trust rates of Citizens Advice well above 90%. And some of the work that we've done on, it's obviously good for us to invest in self-help online content, given the number of people that we help online and the demand coming through in other channels. But the work we've tried to do a bit of work on understanding the outcomes that people have got from our self-help kind of online content. And I would caveat this with, it's obviously very difficult to follow up a lot of people that look at your online content, so it's a small pool of people. But we found, with that kind of caveat, we found that about a third find what they're looking for, are really happy, and go away and take action. About a third don't find what they're looking for, so they call us up or they go to a local Citizens Advice. And about a third find what they're looking for, what they want reassurance, so they're going to contact us anyway. And so what we found was, testing different ways of getting that content to people and testing different ways of presenting information, there is still fundamentally a third that, however good that is, still want that reassurance that the information is right. And so, as Joanna was really saying, if they then need to go to the back of the queue, try and access it, when all they really want to say is, I found this, is that right? And I can kind of get on with my life, that's a huge issue. huge level of inefficiency and a huge drain for the person who's then got to go through that journey. So you could obviously free so much time up to help other people. So I think it really supports what you're saying, and we were surprised at just how high that is, particularly when we've got such high levels of trust from the public. And so if commercial organisations often will not have that level, and so that'll be even more stark, I would imagine.
And especially for financial services, when the decisions that you're making could really hurt you. Like if you get it wrong when applying for a mortgage, and a lot of people are worried about the safety of their data. I read something the other day from NetApp that said 2/3 of customers need evidence-based reassurance that the data that they're providing is going to be safe. And so I think we need to segment our customer base to understand which customers are most likely to feel safe doing which, and we can't assume that everyone's destination is 100% self-serve. I don't know if I think it might be a relevant time to also talk about fraud, because of course the fraudsters are going to innovate at the same pace as financial services. They are, it's their livelihood. And so the trouble is that the rise in digitization, which is, COVID's been a bit of a catalyst to it, which is great. Overall, from 92 to 94% are online now. But the trouble is, in the same period, there's been an astronomical increase in cyber-related fraud. So I think financial services need to take the responsibility, and that's why I was having a bit of a dig about consumer outcomes. You might be celebrating the fact that people are doing more things online and more happy to manage their savings online, but we need to take ownership of the fact that 61% of reported fraud are cyber related, and only 58% of people who are online think that the benefits outweigh the risks. That's 58% of the people who are online. So we've got huge problems around people's concerns about online safety, the safety of their money, the safety of their data. And I think unless we face into those concerns and customers hear us say, we realise that, safety is important, let us understand your concerns and then reassure you. Unless we address those with honesty, I think it becomes a barrier. People are going to mistrust us more and more if we don't fess up that there are some security problems. And then I think once you're on a level playing field with your customers of accepting that there are security problems and this is how we can overcome it together, then you've got a foundation of trust. But if you're just pushing online services without addressing the safety concerns, people are just going to start going deaf to what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because you're not speaking into what they believe is the truth.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So it sort of leads on to this next one for you, Daniel. So Citizens Advice Centres provide digital coaching support. Could you share some of the highlights on that progress, but also some of the challenges that you've entailed? And then I'll actually follow that up with one of the questions that came through the Q&A. But it would be good to get that experience from you first, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's worth saying that, the nature of our service, we're a federated structure, so we're able to secure some funding nationally. We've got 250 local offices in the federation, and so local offices do their own business development locally too. And so something like this, which is not commissioned nationally, is dependent on local offices being able to secure that investment locally. And so it's worth saying that sometimes that's not kind of consistently provided across the piece, but we do try and build that into some of our national programs. So we do have a project with the DWP which involves helping people claim universal credit kind of more quickly and more efficiently, and this was born out of the fact that at the beginning, a number of years ago, the average time between claim and receiving universal credit was between 11 and 13 weeks, and so clearly, if you're without money for that period of time, it's going to have pretty severe impact upon you. And so we worked really closely with the DWP in partnership with them to design a program which helped people to submit their claim, gather all the right evidence, but also as part of that, help them either get online or understand how that universal credit system works. And of course, if we can get that right, then that reduces the number of queries that the DWP job coaches get, frees them up to do the actual job coaching, and it also means that people are getting universal credit earlier, so they're less likely to fall into debt, less likely to lose their home. So it's a sort of win-win for everyone, really. So we do try and build that in, and for us, obviously, a lot of our clients are interacting, particularly with either financial services or with governmental services. So we try and make sure that that is where we can build it in. It's kind of tailored to those systems itself, making sure people have those basic skills that are required. Often, though, it is, as we've kind of touched on a little bit here, it's giving people confidence by them, actually sitting with somebody that they really trust in terms of a local citizen advice advisor. But I would say that even with all of that, I would come back to what I said before, that there are definitely groups which will always want reassurance, will always want that nudge, and will always need somebody just to check with, really. So we do try and build it in. It is difficult. It has certainly made a difference, but I think the main thing is, I think, as Joanna made the point earlier on, whether it's friends or family or just someone that's trusted, it's having that sort of someone that you trust that you can check with to get that reassurance, and that confidence builds over time. And it's not something that changes overnight, but it does build over time and does make a real difference.
Thank you. So I'm going to read this question from the Q&A. Have any, and this is for all of you, have any of the panelists experienced variations in digital engagement across different stages of the customer journey? So, for example, high engagement and usage when applying for products and services versus low usage when switching to other channels. And they switch to other channels in like repayments or arrears situation. Joanna, I know you've...
I'll start with talking about the golden period. So when I used to work on current accounts and digitisation of current accounts, I used to talk about, depending on who you talk to, 30 or 60 days. That is the time that you have got to onboard a customer and to build the habits that you want to sustain, because that's when it's novel. Someone has really high motivation to engage with the channel when they want to get a product, because that's a really short-term and tangible goal. One of the problems that we have in financial services generally is the intangibility of services. So when someone wants to access a product, they're going to be high motivated. But also the novelty factor can really, you like playing around with a new app, or, I don't think people like playing with financial services products, but, an app can be quite novel. And in the first week, you might just go and experiment a bit yourself. Some banks have done really well with gamification of that onboarding journey and encouraging people to adopt new habits in that time. I haven't yet seen banks supporting people who wouldn't know how to do that intuitively. So I think that there's an opportunity to build into that, dare I say again, the friends and family support, tutorials. This is how to do this thing. But that's your golden period. That's when people are most likely to engage with your digital channels, is in the first 30 to 60 days. If we go back to thinking about motivation, perceptions, trust, then yes, arrears situations may be one of the least likely. When you think that there could be a negative consequence or a negative outcome of engaging with a firm. So if you are in arrears, because of the general lack of trust in financial services, I'm just going to throw it out there. I know from the work that I've done on vulnerability that the majority of people with a vulnerability don't share it with their bank because they think it will be used against them rather than for them. I don't have the stats to hand, but arrears situations would be another one where anyone who works in that specialism will know that it's quite hard to engage with customers. I think digital could be a real opportunity there, because if somebody is exhausted talking about their circumstances for why they're in that situation, maybe having the opportunity to take action and receive reassurance and take action without having to talk to a person could help engage that population. I don't have the figures to hand though, but I certainly know that in terms of positive variation, the novel first period of opening product is always the best to engage people. But there's things that you can do, right? So the whole thing about enablement is understanding the motivations of your customers by segment and working out how you can build on that intrinsic motivation. So, ISA year end a lot of people are engaging with their savings at either year end or the tax year beginning. That could be a great opportunity to encourage people to look at doing a little bit more digitally because they have high intrinsic levels of motivation. I'll start speaking. Hand over to Tom.
Did you want to add anything, Tom? Or I've got a nice question for you coming up.
No, I think just to sort of echo a lot of the points made already, that I think there's no sort of one size fits all model when it comes to digital inclusion, that there's such a diversity in terms of what people's needs are and how they can best be served. And I think that has to be sort of factored in, that it's not really a question of sort of digital or offline. It's a question of how you can sort of amalgamate those and you can provide the right support depending on the context and the capabilities and the needs of the individual.
Yeah.
Can I just come in really quickly on this point,
Yeah,
Gary? Just to say, like, on the point of lower engagement, particularly when it comes to arrears, if you are in arrears with, we know that if you're in arrears with a provider, it's more likely than not that you're in arrears somewhere else too. So therefore, I think in those situations, I think Joanna's right that then there is a risk that engaging online feels, it feels obviously it can feel less personal, and that information may well be used to your detriment. And I think what's really important there is to think about what the root cause might be. So, we know that if someone is struggling financially or at risk of homelessness or going through a relationship breakdown, they're less likely to find and sustain work. We know that for our work on universal credit. So by the same token, if you are struggling financially and you're in arrears, it's really important to understand what that root cause may be. That may be a relationship breakdown. That may be that someone's lost their job. And if we're not dealing with what has caused that issue in the first place, then that engagement is unlikely to increase because that issue hasn't gone away. So, this is genuinely not like for citizens bias, but ultimately, we have some examples where we're sort of trialing advisors sitting within bank contact centres just to be able to start to deal with that root cause so that we can get back to, and that's not necessarily a solution, but just things like that. If we don't deal with the root cause, that won't go away, I think.
That's excellent, Daniel. So at Supra, whenever we build customer journeys, we expect that every customer will, at some point, no matter what the product or service is, will jump from a do it myself, do it with me, or do it for me journey throughout their experience with their provider. And at each time they jump out, or jump in or out, it's really important to understand what that root cause is, so you know how to tailor your response to them. So I can totally align to what you're saying then. Tom, I wanted to come back to you because you've spent a lot of time thinking about progress and progress to come. And I know you've created an incredible delivery plan for 2030, or a strategy for 2030. Would you mind sharing some of the highlights on your progress to date, but also, what's to come?
Sure. So the DPA next week actually is launching the first iteration of what we're calling our national delivery plan. So this basically sets out a range of areas where we think action is needed to end digital poverty. So we set out the areas where action is needed from government, where it's needed from industry, but also from the third sector. And the idea is that this national delivery plan will be something that we iterate each year, and as we sort of build in broader sort of changes in how technology is working and how the sort of contextual environment is changing. The way that we're thinking about it at the moment is essentially 6 missions to end digital poverty by 2030. And a lot of the missions, I think, touch on many of the themes that we've discussed today. I mean, there's a massive element in terms of skills, making sure that people have the confidence and the capability to use the digital world. Also, as I mentioned before, on research, so building up our understanding of what sort of digital inclusion looks like and what are the most efficacious interventions to get people online. Also bearing in mind how we can build out more detailed ideas about personas, what are the types of characteristics that individuals are likely to have. if they are digitally excluded, and what are the kinds of messages that will be most pertinent. We're also focusing on the affordability question, because in the cost of living crisis, that will be, we think, a very live issue for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. The other area that I'll just mention briefly that I think is also absolutely critical when we're thinking about digital inclusion is around accessibility, and how we're making sure that digital product and service design is meeting the need of people that may have learning difficulties or may have challenges with being able to interact with the online world. And I think that there has actually been, significant progress that has been made really over the last sort of 5 to 10 years in making digital products more accessible. But I think there's still a long way to go. And part of what we're setting out in our delivery plan is really making sure that when people or when product and service designers are looking at building digital services, that they're really incorporating the perspectives of a diverse range of people into that process, to really make sure that they have the support and they have the ability to customize their experience, depending on their context. So yeah, we're looking forward to the launch of the delivery plan next week. So stay tuned for our website for further information on that.
Yeah, best of luck with that, and hopefully we can support over the next 7-8 years. So I guess not causing a fight between yourself and Daniel, but does that strategy resonate with you, Daniel, and what you see on the ground? Will it shift the dial towards a digital first world?
I think so. I wouldn't. I would agree with what with what Tom said. I think I would probably come back to a couple of things really, which I've spoken about. So I think that reassurance piece can't be underplayed. Those trusted intermediaries, and whether that's friends or family or others, I think that's really important. I think I always come back to things from I've got a legal background, and I always come back to it from a bit of a legal position, when I think that your legal rights are only as good as your ability to enforce them. And I think it's a similar thing in this environment too. Whether you've got the capability but not the access to online, or you've got your internet connection but you haven't got a laptop, but it's a really basic level. But you need all of those three things across the board in order to make that work. So I think we need to sometimes get those basics right in terms of ensuring that everyone has internet connection, an actual device in order to get onto the internet before we start going further. But I think we want to make sure that's in place.
Okay. And then I'll give you the same question, Joanna. So how can service providers support that plan? And actually anybody on the call, if you've got any suggestions, type them in the question, but we can use them to prompt conversation.
Yeah, the first thing that I would say is always about data and the power of data to help understand progress. I think generally data around digital inclusion by service providers has been used to celebrate progress rather than maybe be honest about some of the challenges. So it would be great to see collaboration around sharing and reporting data to say how many people seem to be able to access this at all, and then how many people are using it for information gathering, how many people are happy to use it in a transactional way, where are the barriers and what are we doing about those? Because I think service providers need to come behind this, owning part of the problem, owning the fact that some of the barriers to digitization exist in how digitization has been managed to date, with way more push mechanisms than pull mechanisms, using the language of sort of behavioral science. I would echo the points around reassurance and trusted intermediaries. I also think we need to own the problem around fraud and find ways of collaborating to innovate at a faster pace than the fraudsters, but also have very joined up communication around how people can keep their information and their money safe. 48, so this is from NetApp again, 48% of customers said they'd be more willing to adopt digital self-service options if they had more information that they could trust around safety. And I've always said that sometimes with matters of inclusion, the provider themselves is not the best person to impart that information because their motivations in doing so may be doubted. So maybe there's a great collaboration to be had between Citizens Advice and the banking sector or others in getting the message about the scam reduction and safety, increasing safety out there, so that that perceptual barrier around safety and even the practicalities of avoiding being scammed aren't a barrier to people being able to participate in this move towards digitization. Whilst I pause for breath, I'm also going to pick up on that question that I've seen next. I think it's a really good one. Like, what about people who don't want to be part of this revolution? Like, what about people who by 2030, really the worst possible thing would be being online? And then I think you have to honour and respect that, and dare I say it, value people. If as a service provider, we're so headlong focused on digital being the best, firstly, you need to make sure it genuinely is a better alternative. Like, you're never going to convince people to stick to self-service if they try it once and it's so painful that they end up having to phone in anyway, or want that reassurance. But secondly, if we obsess too much with the digital journey, without weaving in what I would call digital assistance into your other channels, so that if someone does need to dip into having some do it with me support, that's an easy journey. So it doesn't demotivate them from trying digital in the first place. But even then, you will have some people who, either due to a vulnerability or past experience, or insurmountable practical or perceptual barriers, wants to or needs to be offline. It's so important that you value that person and they're not made to feel that they have let you down as a service provider. Like, I would just go to the root of service provider. We're there to serve customers, not the other way round. So valuing people and making sure that it is not made difficult for them to access a human is so important, because remember, they will share their experiences with some of your digital customers, and it all comes back to the question of who you trust with your money, who you trust to serve your granny, or whoever. So yeah, it's about making sure there's a balance, isn't it? But then it's what we've been saying all along, there's not online or offline. Most people are hybrid users. So making it easy to switch between, to dabble. Some people just want to dabble in digital. Yeah.
I love a discount if I get offered to do this online and you get a 10% discount. But my husband, it absolutely drives him mad, and he will not use that organization just for that little sentence that they said. So yeah, really different. Thank you, Joanna. We have 4 minutes left, so I actually think I'm going to come with our last questions, which is more of a reflection from each of you. So if we were to repeat this conversation in a year's time, what would each of you like to have celebrated in terms of the progress that we've all made towards digital inclusion? So if we start with, we'll go Tom, Daniel, and Joanna.
So I think one of the things that will be really important is that there's clear sort of leadership amongst government and amongst industry and amongst the third sector to really drive this agenda forward, to really ensure that where possible, we're able to signpost people to support, where people are able to access support in a way that suits their needs. So not something that's sort of being imposed on them, but something that almost meets them where they are, that is sort of integrated into their daily life rather than being an additional burden. And I think that if that's underpinned then by a much clearer sense across the UK in terms of the strategic direction of why digital inclusion is important, I think that would be really, really valuable. We do know that there's a huge amount of great practice that's happening across the UK in terms of building up local ecosystems to support people through training or through signposting, through sharing of data. I think it's just a case of sharing what works and building on that to make sure that as many people as possible have access to that support and are able to take that up if they so choose to do so.
I would like to see, so I mean, I'm going to steal a stat from Tom's website again, which was that 26% of young people don't have access to a laptop or similar device. And so I think in a year's time, I would like to see that figure come down. You know, I think it's a real concern about the life chances of younger people if they are digitally excluded. But I also think to the question that's in the chat about how we can get friends and family to help, I think there's equally an opportunity there. And if we can improve that statistic and then get younger people on board as well with some of the issues that we've talked about today and the role that they can play in helping others and members of their family to become more digitally included. I think that's just one thought around how we can get friends and family more involved with the issue. But yeah, certainly want to see that figure come down.
Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on friends and family as well. I think at the minute we have a bit of digital hoping for the best, and I'd like to see digital enablement, which includes, you know, self-help resources that people who want to use them themselves can, those who want to share that with their nephew who already helps them learn how to use things online and work through it together. To me, it's much the same resources, but it's planting the thought in customers' minds that actually we really value the role of their friends and family who help them in their skills. So step-by-step guides, video tutorials, etc. So I'd like to see firms being proactive about tailoring digital enablement support and encouraging the use of that. I'm also going to be slightly cheeky and say I don't want any more IVR messages telling me I could be doing something online. But digital options should be so compelling that that's where I've gone first. So if I'm phoning in, it's either because I can't use digital or because something's gone wrong. So I think we're being very black and white about things. If we have long IVR messages telling me I could be doing something another way, I don't mind being pinged a URL, by the way. So if someone could send me a hyperlink to my phone, oh, you're going to be waiting a few minutes. Do you want to have a go at doing this online? Here's the information, but no long IVRs. Death to the long IVR message.
I mean, that's it. Time's up. I wanted to finish with a picture that I think reflects what we're trying to say here. So build it and they will come. It just does not work. You've got to really prepare and enable digital services. And the picture that reflected that for me was, you know, in a safari park, they had built a beautiful ravine for all the bucks to come in and drink at the water hole. And there was a sign that said, you know, buck drinking hole. And underneath the sign was a big, fearsome lion. And that for me captured the build it and we will come, that it's just not true. So I think I'll send that as a follow-up so you can all remember the animal build it and we will come challenge. But Daniel, Tom, Joanna, thank you so much for your time. It was a really interesting discussion, really valued, and I will definitely get in touch in a year's time to make sure that we have hopefully gone quite far and beyond where you expect the progress to be. So, and I know that you don't mind collaborating. So if anybody does want to reach out with further questions, please to do so just through, you can contact myself or Joanna, and again, we'll send you the details and we'll pass that on. So I think Wendy, we can shut down, but thank you everyone for your time, and on we go to digital inclusion.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks.